We've got less than a minute until that finishes. We will expect to hear a call out for nominal burn, which will confirm completion of that deorbit burn for Dragon Freedom. We can see images there from the touchscreen display panels that the crew utilizes in flight. We can see the visualization of exactly which one of the four forward Draco thrusters are firing. That's why you have kind of like a strobe effect there.
And if you're just joining us, you are looking at live views of the Dragon Freedom. On your left is Commander of Crew 9, Nick Hague. To his right is Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grabenkin. And also in Gorbunov, excuse me, that is Alexander Gorbunov. And then also in the capsule today is NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. We are awaiting confirmation that their deorbit burn is complete, which is the last burn that's going to help set them up on a trajectory to splash down off the coast of Florida.
Deorbit burn complete. Performance nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
Freedom copies.
All right, excellent news there. We heard the words we were looking for, nominal burn. So that means that that deorbit burn was successful and nominal, meaning as expected. And we're now beginning to close the nose cone in preparation for atmospheric reentry.
So in the background, Dragon is currently inhibiting nose forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge, which will help keep Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander cool and comfortable during reentry, which is coming up in about 20 minutes from now. At this point, the nose cone is closing and protecting the forward hatch for reentry, and the crew are using their screens to continue to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks. And as we mentioned earlier, that nose cone has remained open since September, so this is the first time it's closing in a few months.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, we will be expecting, as I mentioned before, an entry brief from SpaceX Core. Again, that's the crew operations resource engineer who is seated in that room that you see there on your screen. That entry brief will provide updated times for anticipated splashdown as well as the loss of signal or period of LOS. That briefing will also give us information such as wind speed and wave height at the expected splashdown location. But all in all, everything has been great today. All events have been executed on time as expected, and we are looking forward to a splashdown of the Crew 9 crew at about 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time or 2:57 p.m. Pacific Time. Between now and then, things are going to start moving quite quickly. In fact, if anything, this will have seemed like the slower part of the reentry phase. We're going to go through, like I said, that period of loss of signal or LOS. That period is a few minutes long where we are unable to communicate or command the capsule due to the plasma that builds up on the exterior of the capsule. That period, like I said, lasts for a couple minutes. You will start to hear SpaceX Core hail the Crew 9 crew a little bit earlier than expected because we, in the past, have actually regained communications a couple minutes earlier than initially anticipated. So we'll go through that period of loss of signal, that entry period, that specifically when the Dragon spacecraft is re-entering through the atmosphere. Approximately at about 18,000 feet when the capsule is traveling at 350 miles per hour. We will see our first views of parachutes for the day. It's one of my favorite moments of return sequences is when we get to see the drogue parachutes. We'll see the drogues come out. Those drogues will help slow the vehicle down to about 119 miles per hour. And then that is when the main parachutes will come out from the Dragon spacecraft and then ultimately end in splashdown.
And we are hearing confirmation that the nose cone is closed and everything was nominal or as expected with that closure. So as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject cooled nitrox into the air being delivered to the spacesuits worn by Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So the heat shield is pointing forward, leading Dragon to the landing site.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of PICA 3.0, which stands for Phenolic Impregnated Carbon Ablator. The first-gen PICA was initially developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop PICA X, which was the second-generation product used on all Dragon 1 cargo resupply service missions that resupplied the International Space Station on 20 missions. PICA 3.0 was developed specifically for use on Dragon 2 crew and cargo with enhanced structural and thermal capabilities that allowed the heat shield to be even more effective in the way that it utilized the ability to make that heat ablevate as it goes through the Earth's atmosphere.
The remainder of Dragon is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection which is lighter weight versus PICA and protects the underlying composite structure during reentry to ensure the structural capabilities are maintained.
While Dragon will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees during peak reentry conditions, the characteristics of the thermal protection system coupled with the environmental control and life support system in the pressurized interior will ensure that Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander stay cool and comfortable during all phases of reentry through splashdown.
Now, if you've just recently joined us, we hope to regain views of our crew members inside Dragon Freedom, but we don't have those available at the moment due to ground station coverage. So we will bring those back to you as soon as we can. Now, after Dragon Freedom has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. First will be the 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main parachutes, and those will guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since it launched back in September. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the spacecraft detect that they're at the right speed and altitude.
Vehicle velocity at drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 18,000 feet. Now, when the vehicle velocity at main deploy is approximately 119 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 6,500 feet. When Dragon splashes down in the water, the vehicle velocity will be about 16 miles per hour, so you can really see how those parachutes help to slow down the crew inside the capsule. The highest G-load the crew is expected to experience today is about 3 to 5 Gs.
Yeah, when you think about really fun roller coasters, they're about in that range. So I'm sure that our crew on board will be well equipped to experience those Gs. It's nothing for them. They go through much more intense training.
And so we are continuing to make our way through a number of milestones today. We did have trunk separation.
Freedom, SpaceX. Nose cone is secure for entry.
Freedom copies.
All right, great news there. That tells us that the final physical configuration change for Dragon is complete. We have closed that nose cone. This is the last physical change that Dragon undergoes prior to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. It's important that that nose cone is completely closed because underneath it is not only where the 4 forward Draco thrusters are located, but it's also because that is where the forward hatch is located. That is the hatch that is utilized for the crew to ingress and egress from the station while it is docked on board. And since our capsules are flight proven and we reuse them on future space flights, we want to make sure that all of the integrity of that hardware remains intact. So that nose cone is successfully closed, and we're going to start moving pretty quickly here. As I mentioned before, we'll go through loss of signal. We'll get that signal back several minutes later, and then we'll see the parachute action.
Yep, and then that's all ahead of splashdown off the coast of Florida. We're targeting Tallahassee as our splashdown zone today at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now, you did mention the call to the crew. They'll do some additional calculations following that burn and potentially let us know if that splashdown time has changed at all. But right now, we are continuing to target 2:57 p.m. And you can see there on your screen a path of where Dragon will be re-entering today. So if you are in the southern tip of Mexico, you might have the opportunity to see Dragon. Because it's a daytime splashdown, you probably won't have too great of views, but potentially you'll have the opportunity to get a glimpse of it there.
Once again, Dragon operators, they're monitoring the progress of Dragon through this re-entry phase. That is SpaceX Mission Control, located here in Hawthorne, California. That is also where the crew operations and resource engineer is seated. That person is the voice that we have heard multiple times and will continue to hear as the primary point of contact to the crew on board Dragon Freedom. We will also hear the voice of Commander Nick Hague. Basically, after we hear the Corps communicate something, we will hear Nick Hague indicate that they copy, that they heard the message well, some sort of recognition that the message was received.
And if you joined us yesterday for our coverage during the undocking, we were communicating through something that's called a big loop. We do that when we're in integrated operations with the International
Freedom, SpaceX, for entry sequence. Report when ready to copy.
Ready to copy.
All right, I've got some updated times for you. Our comm blackout start time is 2144. Our comm blackout end time is 2151, and our splashdown time is the same per your displays, 2157.
Okay. Understand comm blackout start 2144, stop 2151, splashdown per display.
That's a good readback. And with that, please report when tablets are secured behind the elastic bands, restraints are tight, and visors are down.
And copy, welcome.
And with that communication from the Corps or Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague of Crew Dragon Freedom, we did hear that the loss of signal period is still at 2:44 p.m. Pacific, but we had a 1-minute adjustment to the acquisition of signal. That's going to now be at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time. However, our splashdown time remains the same at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
So all good news there as Dragon continues to make its way home with the Crew 9 crew. As we've mentioned before, we are splashing down on the Gulf Coast. We have ability to splash down on either side of Florida, but the location site just outside of Tallahassee, Florida is the site that was selected today due to best recovery conditions. And as Sandra mentioned before, weather is always a watch item, but everything is looking great for that particular recovery location. So I'm sure once we start getting views from the recovery vessel, I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty beautiful afternoon.
And we did mention that, of course, this is a daylight splashdown, so we should be getting some great views. We do have a couple of spacecraft called the WB-57, which are high-altitude planes that NASA utilizes during splashdown operations. Those are en route and going to be tracking the capsule as it makes its way through the atmosphere and should be providing some good views for us. Kate and I were just chatting about how we haven't had a daytime splashdown in a little while, so we're looking forward to the views along with you.
Yeah. Nighttime views are also great because we can see that capsule streaking through the night sky quite brightly. So like Sandra, you said earlier, daylight will be a little bit less bright, but we will definitely be able to see the SpaceX recovery team operations much clearer. I could also imagine it's probably a little bit easier for the team themselves to do their work in daytime than at nighttime. We'll see them rush in really quickly with a couple of fast boats as they begin the initial safety checks and sweeps of the Dragon capsule, while also retrieving the parachutes from the surface of the ocean. The recovery vessel, the main recovery vessel, will continue to make its way closer to the Dragon capsule. It is stationed a couple miles away from the actual recovery location, the splashdown location, for obvious safety purposes. So it takes a little while for that vessel to make its way over, but once it's closer, we'll have even better views of those recovery operations.
And you may be wondering why sometimes we splash down in the daytime versus the nighttime. And believe me, we would all love for these operations to happen during regular daytime working hours. But unfortunately, orbital mechanics just doesn't quite work out that way. So it has to deal with the location of the International Space Station, as well as where the splashdown zone is on Earth in that trajectory, as well as the phasing. So as we mentioned earlier, sometimes we have phasing as short as 6 hours, sometimes in excess of 30+ hours. It just depends on where the targeted area is that the capsule is going to splash down. So today's phasing has been 17 hours since undocking occurred at 10:05 p.m. Pacific yesterday evening for us here in Hawthorne. Early wee hours for folks on the East Coast and other areas of the United States.
Yeah, but regardless of whether it's daytime or nighttime, the SpaceX recovery team has trained and practiced and rehearsed for it all. So regardless of daylight, they are really efficient with those operations. And but like you said, Sandra, it has been a minute since we have seen a daytime splashdown on a NASA SpaceX crew mission. The last daytime recovery was on Crew 4, which was the debut flight for the capsule flying today, the spacecraft known as Dragon Freedom. And so, yeah, kind of a fun fact there in terms of the timing of that daylight splashdowns. Once again, standing by for more communication with the crew. The next event that we have coming up is the start of that period known as loss of signal. That is the period still expected at 2:44 p.m. Pacific time. This lasts for several minutes while the capsule is making its way through the Earth's atmosphere. The heat shield located at the bottom of the capsule, really doing all the work at that point in time in terms of using the atmosphere to slow the capsule down from its orbital speeds of 17,500 miles per hour.
Our tablets are secure, restraints are tightened, visors down. We are configured for entry.
Freedom, I copied. Tablets are secured, restraints are tight, and visors down.
All right, great news there in terms of continuing to make progress. That back and forth communication we heard was just letting Core know that per their instructions, Crew 9 has now put away everything that was necessary in order to begin the re-entry, including those tablets that were located on their legs. Those are now stowed away. They've tightened that safety harness that we see there, and the visors are now down. So with all that being said, let's take a minute to meet our returning crew. U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick Hague is your Crew 9 commander. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013. This was his second spaceflight to the International Space Station and third launch overall. He spent 171 days in space with Crew 9 and has a career total of 374 days in space. During his mission, he completed a spacewalk with astronaut Suni Williams. That was his fourth spacewalk, earning him a career total of 25 hours, 56 minutes of spacewalking time. Before Crew 9, Hague previously served as a crew member of Expedition 59 and 60 back in 2019. He flew with Alexei Ovchinin and NASA's Christina Cook. So this is his second time sharing the space station with Ovchinin. The Kansas native is a test pilot and distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Nick spent 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He voluntarily transferred from the United States Air Force to U.S. Space Force in 2021 and is an active colonel. His wife, Katie, is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and they have 2 sons.
NASA astronaut Suni Williams is a mission specialist for Crew 9. This was her third visit to the International Space Station. She originally launched aboard Boeing Starliner spacecraft and arrived at the space station on June 6th. Following the agency's decision to return Starliner uncrewed, she became an Expedition 71 and 72 crew member, where she logged 286 days in space on this mission. But Suni has a total of 608 days in space, the second most time in space by a U.S. astronaut.
5 minutes until predicted comm blackout. We'll see you on the other side at 21:51.
Talk to you soon.
And with that call out from the Crew Operations Resource Engineer to Commander Nick Hague, letting them know that everything is looking good ahead of the loss of signal period. We will see the crew on the other side of the loss of signal period at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Continuing on about Suni Williams, who has a total of 608 days in space, the second most time in space by a U.S. astronaut. Former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson actually ranks first for the U.S. with 675 days in space. Suni conducted 2 spacewalks and has completed 9 over the course of her career for a total of 62 hours, 6 minutes of spacewalking time. She ranks 4th on the list of cumulative time spacewalking by a female astronaut, and she has flown on 4 different spacecraft types, including the Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now Dragon. Previously, she served on Expedition 14 and 15 in 2006 and 2007, and again with Expedition 32 and 33 in 2012. She's a retired U.S. Navy captain and is a proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and was the first astronaut to run a marathon in space.
Pretty awesome stuff. Now, NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore is also serving as a mission specialist today. This is his 3rd spaceflight and, just like Suni, logged 286 days in space. He conducted 1 spacewalk and completed 5 over the course of his career, earning him a total spacewalking time of 21 hours and 2 minutes. He's flown on 4 different spacecraft types throughout his career: the Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now Dragon. Previously, the Mount Juliet, Tennessee native served on STS-129 in 2009 and Expedition 41 and 42 from 2014 to 2015. Wilmore is also a retired captain in the U.S. Navy.
Next up is Alexander Gorbanov, who is the 3rd mission specialist serving on today's mission. Crew 9 was his first space flight to the space station, earning him a total of 171 days in space over the course of his career. Gorbanov, along with Nick Hague, saw the arrival of 4 visiting vehicles and saw the departure of 4 as well. The duo orbited the Earth more than 2,700 times since September. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, Gorbanov worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. So if you are just joining us, we are continuing to bring you live coverage of Crew 9's return to Earth following their mission aboard the International Space Station, where they completed science and research investigations. We are targeting splashdown off the coast of Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. The next major milestone that we'll look ahead towards is what we call loss of signal, or LOS, when we won't have communications with the crew because they will be re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And during this process, there is plasma that builds up around that heat shield, so we are not able to communicate with the crew, but we are anticipating to regain communications with the crew at a short time from now at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time today.
As we said before, everything continues to look good for the return of the Crew 9 team. We are about to go into that period of loss of signal. Once we get views of the crew inside the capsule, once again, we will be sure to bring those to you. But that period of time is when plasma is building up on the exterior of the capsule, generating heat in excess of 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So we are unable to communicate or command the spacecraft at that time. And that includes, unfortunately, video feeds as well. So as soon as we get the views back inside Dragon, we will bring those to you. But until then, we are going to stand by and continue to monitor the progress of Dragon. Like Sandra just said, we are anticipating the blackout period to begin at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time, 5:51 p.m. Eastern time. This will last for several minutes. It's not super exact, even though we are predicting acquisition of signal, or AOS, to come back at 5:51 p.m. Eastern time. In the past, we have regained communications sometimes a little bit earlier than that, so we'll probably start to hear Core begin to hail Crew Dragon a minute or two prior to that anticipated acquisition of signal. But right now, Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander are seated in their seats inside Dragon Freedom. Their visors are down, and they have put away or stored the tablets they had located on their upper leg to monitor Dragon's progress. Now they will be utilizing the touchscreen displays, where the current operation and future operations will be displayed as they are able to monitor Dragon's progress continually. As I said before, Dragon is autonomous, meaning it is flying itself. So the crew stands by and monitors, and those touchscreen displays are what will be allowing them to do so and prepare for events such as parachute deploy.
And while on board the International Space Station, Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander contributed to over 900 hours of science and research investigations, which is really the key purpose of the International Space Station. Now, the International Space Station is celebrating a major milestone this year, where they will be celebrating 25 years of continuous human presence in November. So if you're younger than 25 years, you've never known a day where there hasn't been a human living and working aboard the International Space Station, contributing to key science and research investigations that impact our lives here on Earth. There's research being done on Parkinson's, on osteoporosis, on cancer research, and a variety of other studies. Additionally, the microgravity laboratory provides a jumping off point for us as we venture back to the moon and onto Mars through longer duration space flights. One such example that the crew worked on during this mission was an alternative exercise device. In microgravity, the crew has to exercise for about 2 hours a day because they're not having the effects of gravity on their body. So to prevent bone and muscle loss, we counteract that with 2 hours of exercise per day. On board the International Space Station, they have 3 ways in which they can exercise. They have a bike, they have a treadmill, and they have a similar to a weightlifting machine that counteracts the microgravity environment. But a particular experiment that this crew tested out was a combination of all 3 of those in one smaller device, and this is really critical as we continue on to the moon, Mars, and beyond, because space is really important in spacecraft. So if we have something smaller that the crew might be able to utilize, that can potentially help us venture out even further into the solar system. So science is really the name of the game when it comes to the International Space Station. Some of the other science highlights that took place during this increment that are particularly interesting to me was we had the first wooden satellite that was deployed. This is a study to see if other materials might be more resourceful or renewable in space. So I'm really excited to see the results of that one as well. Additionally, we had a couple of spacewalks that took place to not only provide maintenance to the International Space Station, but also where we swabbed the outside of the space station near vents to see if any microbes that we all have microbes on us, to see if any of those could survive in the harsh environment of space, which again is very important for us to know and understand as we continue to the moon, Mars, and beyond.
Very exciting stuff. Now, at this point, we have now entered the communications blackout period for the Dragon spacecraft. This lasts approximately 7 minutes due to plasma formation around the spacecraft itself. During this time, no vehicle telemetry is received by mission control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. But as a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself. During re-entry, the vehicle will be slowing down from orbital velocity, which is approximately 17,500 miles per hour. The top temperature that Dragon will experience upon re-entry is 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. This blackout period, as I said before, we expect it to last about 7 minutes today, concluding at 5:51 p.m. Eastern Time or 2:51 p.m. Pacific Time. We right there have our first view of Dragon Freedom coming home to Earth.
And that view is from the WB-57, which is one of NASA's high-altitude planes that is tracking. Now, because of the way that this camera is configured, it does look like it is dark, but it is indeed daytime, and you're beginning to see that plasma trail as Dragon re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. All of that is expected. We are anticipating an acquisition of signal around 2:51 p.m. Pacific Time, so just minutes from now, and you may hear the core begin to hail out or call Dragon for communications and see if we can potentially get communications with them a little bit earlier. Following this, we'll have two events in rapid succession. We'll have the drogue parachutes deploy at 2:53 p.m. Pacific, followed by the mains just 1 minute later at 2:54 p.m. Pacific Time, ahead of a splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific Time off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
Pretty incredible views of the Dragon spacecraft making its way home back to planet Earth with the Crew 9 astronauts on board. Once again, this view is coming from the WB-57 plane. That heat shield we can see doing magnificent work as it works to...
Freedom, SpaceX, comm check.
All right, we're going to start hearing the SpaceX Crew Operations Resource Engineer.
SpaceX Freedom is with you. 4.16. Enjoying the ride.
Copy that, Freedom.
Great news there from Commander Nick Hague reporting back.
We see a healthy flight computer. Expect automated chute deployment.
Freedom copies.
Like we said before, things moving very quickly as Dragon Freedom makes its way home. Next event coming up will be deployment of the drogue parachutes. This occurs around 18,000 feet.
GPS has converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deployment.
We're about 2 minutes away from deployment of those drogue parachutes. Now the heat shield is continuing to work to slow the vehicle down. That entry period, the Dragon spacecraft went from orbital velocity about 17,500 miles per hour down to about 350 miles per hour. So that really gives you a sense of why that plasma builds up on the exterior of the capsule thanks to the heat shield and the work that it does. Those drogue parachutes will slow it down from 350 to about 119 miles per hour. We can see
15 kilometers. Brace for drogue window.
We can see seat rotation happening inside the capsule. Great to get those first views of our crew members. Once again, the capsules are going about 350 miles per hour when the drogues are deployed. Those drogue parachutes that we manufacture here in-house are going to slow the spacecraft down to 119 miles per hour. And that is when we will see the main parachutes deploy, and that occurs about 6,000 feet above the ocean's surface.
And we are expecting drogue deployment at 2:53 p.m. Pacific, so we should see it any second now. And there you are getting a great view of Crew 9 inside Dragon Freedom as it returns back to Earth. We are awaiting the drogue deploys. This view coming from the WB-57 high altitude plane. And there you see it on your screen, drogue deployment.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
You can hear the crowd here.
Visual on 2 healthy drogues.
The crowd here very excited as Dragon Freedom continues to make its way back to planet Earth.
Next up, we'll stand by for the main deployment of the parachutes. The mains are quite a bit larger. You'll be able to notice the difference on your screen once they deploy, and they continue to ensure that the Dragon spacecraft slows down even further. As we mentioned, Freedom will be traveling 16 miles per hour when it splashes down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, here at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. And there we go.
We have visual on 4 healthy mains.
That view was from inside.
Freedom copy.
That view was from inside one of the buckets where the parachutes are located. So we see a great view there of the reefing on those parachutes. And as those main parachutes begin to inflate fully, 4 beautiful, healthy mains. Now awaiting visuals of splashdown.
Freedom, 1,000.
We'll start to hear Commander Nick Hague.
Copy, 1,000.
As we heard right there, Commander Nick Hague will be calling out the altitude of the Dragon capsule from here on out. Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. You can see those parachutes continuing to slow the Dragon capsule down.
And if you're just joining us, you're looking at
800 meters.
a live view of Crew 9, just minutes away from splashing down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Splashdown 2 minutes from now at 2:57 p.m. Pacific. We do have 4 healthy mains really doing the job there. Just breathtaking views of a calm, glass-like ocean off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Crew 9 just minutes away from splashing down.
This is really such an incredible shot.
Copy, 600.
That was a live view from our recovery vessel, Megan, which is stationed a couple miles away from the splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely.
400 meters.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew 9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour, and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown located in the Gulf of America off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown, Crew 9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of grins ear to ear.
And as you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation of splashdown. Dragon Freedom has returned home, and NASA astronauts.
System safety verifications are in progress. We'll report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Understand. And we're in section 2, 4.800 landing response. And looking for your words on if it is necessary.
In the distance, we can see the recovery vessel making its way.
Copy, you're in section 2 for the environmental assessment in 4.800. That is not necessary today.
Understand. Raising button.
So we will continue to have communications between the Corps and Nick Hague, the commander of Crew Dragon Freedom, which just splashed down 2 minutes ago off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Dragon Freedom has returned home with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. They're back on Earth after approximately 17 hours of a return journey from space.
The SpaceX recovery ship and team have been waiting for Dragon's splashdown, and they will now make their way to the splashdown location. The teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes or so to make their way
and
to
SpaceX Freedom. Pretty sure we're in stable 1.
Copy, stable 1. We see the same.
It's going to take about 30 minutes for the recovery team to make their way over to Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander, who are still seated and secured inside that Dragon spacecraft there on your screen. Incredible views there of that thermal protection system, or TPS. That Dragon capsule was pristine, white color before it departed the station, and we can see how the reentry phase, the thermal protection system did its job. Now, if you're wondering what that hole, that like bucket area is, that is underneath the side hatch. That is where the main parachutes were stored. So when we saw the Dragon capsule docked at station, it looked very different. The panel that protects and covers the main parachutes, that was still intact, as well as the panels that enclose where the drogue parachutes are located. We can see those fast boats.
SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in the next few minutes.
Freedom copies.
We can see those fast boats. We weren't kidding when we said they were fast. While it does take about 30 minutes for the main recovery vessel to make its way over to the capsule, these fast boats will be doing a couple of things simultaneously. A couple of them are going to be working to retrieve the parachutes that you see in the background there of this drone shot. Those parachutes will be retrieved from the ocean surface. We want to make sure we are able to pull those out. The recovery vessel there closest to the spacecraft is going to be performing some safety checks. We can see there they're using an instrument that is basically working to detect if there are any hypergolic vapors or fumes that are still residing in and or around the Draco thruster nozzles or outlets. the hypergolic fuel, which is necessary for on-orbit burns to maneuver the spacecraft. Unfortunately, those hypergolics are unable to be breathed. They are toxic, and so this team here is doing those initial safety checks to make sure that it is safe for the rest of the recovery team to approach the spacecraft. They're also checking to make sure that any residuals from the pyros are safe and are not going to cause any issues. We can see the team working their way around the spacecraft to do these basically these sniff tests on all of those Draco thrusters.
And as we continue to await the recovery of our Dragon spacecraft with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov inside, Dragon has autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. We are continuing to see Dragon in what is known as stable 1 configuration. That's kind of the ideal configuration following splashdown. It's upright, and the Dragon capsule is in the right configuration for it to be hoisted into the recovery vessel Megan, which you do see a little ways off in your screen approaching. Dragon will continue to remain live on air with you through that recovery process, all the way through the point where the crew is extracted from the Dragon spacecraft. Now, if you are just joining us, the mission has gone smoothly so far. Dragon successfully splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon.
Approximately 17 hours prior to splashdown, Dragon autonomously undocked from the International Space Station, completed a series of departure burns, jettisoned its trunk section, and performed its final burn, the deorbit burn. This placed the Dragon spacecraft on a trajectory toward Tallahassee, Florida. Dragon successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, followed by deployment of its parachutes to slow the spacecraft down to a gentle splashdown. We're now going to follow the
Freedom. Hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks are nominal. Rigging is in progress. Approximately 25 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for PMC with SpaceX flight surgeon.
And so what we did just hear there was communications that those hypergol checks were complete. They didn't find any of that upon those checks, so we'll continue to move through the timeline. Next up is a process called rigging, which you see happening right now on your screen. This is when a SpaceX recovery personnel actually works to climb aboard the capsule and work through procedures ahead of lifting onto the nest of the recovery vessel Megan. We heard it's going to be about 25 minutes or so until that lift actually takes place.
Okay, Freedom, the next call will be from the SpaceX flight surgeon on Dragon and Ground Private.
Understand. Thank you.
Callouts there indicating that the crew will have the opportunity to do a quick check-in with the SpaceX flight surgeon. This is standard procedure for every Dragon spacecraft when it returns to Earth. It's just an initial check-in, make sure everybody is doing okay. They will also have another check-in with the flight surgeon once they are on board that recovery vessel that you see there in the background. We can now see that SpaceX recovery team member they're on top of the Dragon spacecraft. They are going to be working to install plugs in the Draco thrusters to ensure that none of those, and to ensure that no more hypergolic fumes or vapors come out from the spacecraft. They'll also place harnessing around the spacecraft that are required in order to lift it out of the water. Go ahead, Sandra.
Continuing to get some views of the recovery personnel, both the main recovery vessel Megan, as well as some of those fast boats that we've discussed previously. Looks like just a beautiful day there out off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Weather was pristine. We were able to get undocked from the International Space Station as expected at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time yesterday evening, and Crew Dragon has since completed steps ahead of its splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, and we're now stepping through procedures to get Dragon hoisted up onto the Megan recovery vessel and get the crew extracted out of the spacecraft. And you did see some of the parachutes that were near the spacecraft. Upon detection of landing, Dragon automatically releases those main parachutes to prevent wind from pulling the spacecraft. Dragon then automatically safes any pyrotechnics that may still be present on the vehicle and may automatically perform additional minor system reconfigurations. The astronauts will remain seated and in their suits at this point, but the onboard air conditioning keeps things temperature controlled inside the spacecraft so the crew remains comfortable, and the communication systems.
Freedom, SpaceX, ComCheck.
SpaceX, this is Freedom. We loud and clear.
Copy that, Freedom. Have you loud and clear as well, and Dragon to ground is no longer private.
Understand, thank you.
As we saw there on the screen, we have a couple of fast boats in the recovery fleet that have quickly moved into the splashdown location. They are being followed by one of the main recovery vessels, which will move into position upwind of the spacecraft. The two fast boats have very specific roles. Excuse me. The first approach is focused on immediate safety inspection, as we saw. They do this for spacecraft integrity and checking for any presence of those hypergolic propellant vapors. And this ensures that it is safe for the recovery vessel to approach Dragon. Once Dragon is cleared for full approach, as we heard is the case today, the team begins rigging the spacecraft for water recovery by the recovery ship. The second fast boat is responsible for parachute recovery and also serves as a redundant boat to the first one that makes the initial approach to the Dragon spacecraft. As we saw a little bit earlier, we were also able to see one of the recovery team members get on a jet ski to help gather up the parachutes that were automatically detached from the Dragon spacecraft upon splashdown.
And it will take a little over 10 minutes for the recovery crew to complete their safety checks. Once complete, the team will begin preparing Dragon to be lifted, and as you see, they are preparing for that to take place at this point. As part of the preparation for this lift, one member of the recovery team has climbed on top of the spacecraft already so they can attach Dragon's hoist rings and connect to the lifting lines. It will take us less than an hour to raise Dragon to the recovery boat and remove the crew from the spacecraft. After medical checkouts, the crew will return to land within 4 hours by helicopter. And if no additional medical assistance is needed, the crew will board a waiting NASA plane and depart for Houston. And as we continue to await Dragon to be hoisted up onto the ship, we have a very special treat. NASA Public Affairs Officer Jaden Jennings, who is actually on the recovery vessel and had a bird's eye view of the splashdown today. Jaden, how are you? How was the view from the recovery vessel?
Hi, Sandra. How do you hear me?
I've got you loud and clear, Jaden. It's so great to hear you.
Awesome. So splashdown, Sandra, was nothing
Freedom,
short of
be advised.
spectacular.
We are transitioning the forward link. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
Freedom comes.
Thanks so much, Jaden. We did just have some communications letting us know that we'll have about a 5-minute period where we won't be able to hear from the crew. So please go ahead, tell us, how was the view from the recovery vessel?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier, splashdown was nothing short of spectacular. And we were stationed about 1.5 nautical miles away from the splashdown zone and had great visuals here on the recovery vessel Megan. We actually saw a little of the smoke trail as the spacecraft was coming in, and then moments later we spotted those drogue chutes, and this was quickly followed by 4 healthy white and orange main parachutes. We then tracked Dragon all the way down as it slowly propelled into the ocean, and I think I speak for all of us on the ship when I say a new core memory was made today, and we are looking forward to having Crew 9 on board with us a little later.
Jaden, that is amazing. Now, obviously, we are watching it here on camera, and the landing conditions look pretty good, but how was it from your perspective? What is the sea state out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've had optimal conditions for splashdown, and today it is sunny and 63 degrees outside right now with clear skies, light winds, and calm seas. The sea looks absolutely beautiful right now, and light blue with the sun reflecting from it. And Kay, I think the crew's going to like what they feel weather-wise on this picture-perfect day for splashdown off the coast of Tallahassee.
Thanks so much, Jaden. It certainly looks like a beautiful day. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of the recovery forces to get to this point?
Sure. So one unique aspect of this recovery was the onboard training on station conducted for Butch and Sunny to ensure they were ready to return on a Dragon spacecraft. That training covered all aspects of their return, including nominal and contingency departures, deorbit burns, splashdown, and post-landing ops, which is what this team is preparing for now. As for the recovery teams themselves, we started the day taking a series of helicopters out to the vessel, and as standard, the recovery director and crew support teams were on that first helicopter out and took the time to get everything prepared on the ship. About 2 hours before splashdown, they deployed those fast boats and jet skis into the water. I was actually on the second helicopter out, and we were on the vessel about 1.5 hours before splashdown and landed on top of the helicopter pad on the Megan. And the teams have been working diligently across their respective disciplines this week, executing what can only be described, in my point of view, as a logistical masterpiece, just ensuring every detail has been in place for Crew 9's return.
That is such great news. I'm so glad that you're able there to experience it in person. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what's next to retrieve the crew for the recovery personnel on board?
Yeah, Kate. So coming up next, Dragon will be hoisted into the on-deck translation system, or the nest, at the aft end of the ship, and then will be translated pretty quickly towards that egress platform. We'll perform another series of safety checks as final precautionary measures just to make sure there are no hypergolic vapors present before opening that side hatch. And then once that side hatch of the spacecraft is open, the crew will be assisted out of the capsule one by one from NASA and SpaceX.
Freedom, SpaceX, ComCheck.
Freedom's got you loud and clear.
Thanks, Nick. I've got you loud and clear as well. We have completed our forward link transition.
And Jaden, if you did just want to go ahead and let us know what is next to retrieve the crew. We are continuing to get some great views on our screen, but I know you have an even better view yourself.
Oh, yeah, Sandra, this view is absolutely unbeatable. So just to kind of finish off what I was saying is once that side hatch of the spacecraft is open, that crew will be assisted out of the capsule one by one from NASA and SpaceX medical personnel, where they will then head to the med bay. And after those medical checks, they will get on that first helicopter out and arrive at the airport, where they will then board a NASA plane and then head back to Houston, Texas at the Johnson Space Center to begin their post-flight period. And we're eager to see the Crew 9 astronauts back on Earth, and we'll keep you updated on every moment of this process. And with that, I'll toss it back over to you guys in Hawthorne.
Thank you so much. That was Jaden Jennings, NASA Public Affairs Officer, who watched Freedom splash down firsthand from the recovery vessel Megan. Thanks so much, Jaden. So we are continuing to get these great views on our screen here of Freedom. As we mentioned, it splashed down at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. The recovery personnel are continuing to step through procedures to hoist Dragon onto the recovery vessel Megan there, which is now coming into view. You can see just how close Megan is at this point, and that's that helicopter pad that Jaden was just discussing, where the crew will fly off of onto the coast of Florida, and then eventually they'll fly back to Houston.
Just underneath that helicopter pad is that translation deck where we will see the nest once it is loaded up with the Dragon spacecraft on board. The nest will be translated to the forward end of the recovery vessel, and that is where our Crew 9 team members will egress from the Dragon spacecraft. Now, here on your screen, we can see dolphins, actually, who want to come and play with Dragon. Now, one of the fast boats there in place, working to assist the recovery team member. It's incredible. I just love these views. We really see them even better in daytime, but just seeing the recovery team work in tandem to step through each step, to step through each operation. You know, obviously they're getting quick assists from the honorary part of the recovery team, those dolphins in the water there. Now, the recovery team member that is crawling around the Dragon spacecraft. Earlier we saw a view where it was like a spider monkey pose. We can see that individual now standing in the bucket where the main parachutes were stored while Dragon was on orbit. Obviously, those main parachutes were utilized for splashdown today. They were deployed and cut from the Dragon capsule, and one of the fast boats one of the other fast boats of the recovery team working to pull those out of the water. Now, the recovery team member that is there working on top of the Dragon capsule. Earlier, we saw that person performing safety checks. Now we can see some harnessing being placed around the capsule. This harnessing is what will be used to lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. Wow, we got a cute little pod of dolphins. It wasn't just one or two.
I mean, that water just looks beautiful. We had ideal splashdown parameters today. Obviously, wave height, ne'er a concern. The weather is beautiful, as Jaden mentioned, in the 60s, sunny. Looking forward to seeing Crew 9 exit the capsule here shortly once they get hoisted onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We can see that recovery vessel slowly but surely closing the distance there between, oh, dolphin cam back again. We can see that the Dragon capsule and the recovery vessel, that distance is closing. Again, this is just one more step as we continue to work recovery operations for Dragon Freedom, and we anticipate the lift of the Dragon capsule to occur here in just a few minutes. Now, once all of the rigging is on the capsule and it's hooked up to the recovery vessel, we will see the hydraulic arm, which is that kind of like bridge-like structure there at the aft end of the recovery vessel. We'll see that articulate backwards, and that's a good sign that we're getting even closer to pulling the capsule out of the water. It will then move forward, and the capsule will be placed inside of what you can see there is basically a basket. We call it the nest, Dragon nest, where that's where the capsule will be placed in order for it to be translated to the forward end of the vessel and for the astronauts to egress.
And before that does take place, we'll have potentially views of the rigger go ahead and jump off of the spacecraft there.
That typically occurs when the spacecraft is a little bit closer to the recovery vessel, and we usually get a really good view of that particular operation from one of the onboard cameras from the recovery vessel. That is an operation that I have a lot of respect and admiration for, that individual that does that.
So again, Dragon continuing to get closer and closer to the recovery vessel, Megan. You see some of those ropes now coming into view as well. If you are just joining us, Crew 9 splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Butch Wilmore, Sonny Williams, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. They're now working through procedures to hoist this spacecraft up onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We just saw that hydraulic arm get lowered into the lifting position. That arm will be the mechanism that is utilized to lift Dragon up and out of the water and into the nest located there at the aft end of the recovery vessel.
And the recovery vessel being used today is, as we mentioned multiple times, is named Megan, but that's actually after NASA astronaut Megan McArthur, who flew on Crew 2 a couple of years ago. We're getting some views now from actually inside the boat.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This view is straight down the recovery vessel. That platform that was closest to the camera, that is the egress platform.
Freedom, rigging is almost complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Great news there from SpaceX Core. So about 5 minutes left until we see Dragon Freedom get lifted out of the water. That hydraulic arm, as I said before, is the mechanism that will lift it. It's quite swift, actually, the whole process of getting the spacecraft.
Brace for capsule lift.
Bracing.
There it goes, Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water and onto our recovery vessel, Megan.
So once securely on...
Welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and stand by for translation to the egress platform.
Freedom copies.
Great news there, letting us know that Dragon Freedom has been successfully recovered from the water's surface. If you've just joined us, we had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, and we can now see that the water recovery operations are continuing to progress. The nest where the Dragon spacecraft is located is going to get moved forward. This will happen after one of the recovery crew members does some checks, and we'll also see some hosing. Obviously, the spacecraft splashed down in salt water. Salt water is corrosive, and we want to try and rinse out as much of the salt water as possible to reduce that corrosion on the metallic structures. So we can see some guidance there being provided, really steering the spacecraft properly into the Dragon's nest.
And it's been 30 minutes since Dragon splashed down, and as you can see there, the spacecraft is already on board the recovery vessel Megan. Things continuing to move very smoothly today throughout the entire operations from the deorbit burn up until this point as well.
And Freedom, it looks like the positioning wasn't quite right, so they are working on repositioning the capsule in the nest now.
Okay, copy that. Thanks.
And with that, the team is just going to adjust the Dragon spacecraft a bit so that it's in the right position ahead of translating up a little bit closer ahead of the side hatch. So the team is now going to step through the procedures to ensure that that takes place.
While Dragon does fly itself autonomously, it clearly is unable to park itself autonomously. We want to make sure that the Dragon capsule is properly seated there in that nest. Once Dragon is fully seated in the nest, we'll probably see a bunch of that salt water come out from the bucket there located underneath the side hatch. See some salt water splash out. As I mentioned before, one of the recovery team members will begin hosing down the exterior of the spacecraft.
So you are continuing to get some great live views on your screen of Crew 9, which includes NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov, who splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now working to get that spacecraft situated in the nest. Just making some final adjustments and tweaks to ensure that it's nice and secure.
Once the spacecraft is seated and secured and oriented correctly in the nest, Dragon will be moved into the hangar located underneath that helipad that we saw earlier from the aerial views during recovery.
All right, Freedom, looks like you are settled into the nest now. Team is working through hypergol sweeps.
Copy.
Call out there telling us that the recovery team is doing the second round of those hypergolic sweeps. This helps ensure that everyone, all the recovery team members that are located basically right where this camera is located on, towards the forward end of the recovery vessel, that they will all be safe once the spacecraft is translated forward. So we're just doing some additional steps to make sure that the hypergolic propellant that is utilized for maneuvering the Dragon capsule while on orbit, making sure that none of those vapors are still present on the exterior of the capsule.
That's right, and there are a variety of individuals on board the boat that help with recovery operations. Not only do we have the recovery personnel that you see here, but we also have a doctor that will check out the crew members as standard procedure. As with any spacecraft that is returning from space, we always perform a medical check with the crew. So you will see the crew come out of the capsule and be placed on stretchers, just like with the Soyuz landing and with all of our Dragon splashdowns, that is the nominal procedure. We'll stand by to see Dragon Freedom translate or scooch up a little bit closer to the camera angle that we're seeing right here. And then teams will step through procedures to get that side hatch opened. You see it right in the dead center of your screen there. It's kind of that rectangular shape. It has not been opened since since Crew 9, which include Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov, launched back in September from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So that will be the very first time that that hatch is opened. Once docked to the International Space Station, crew enter through the top hatch, which was where the nose cone is now closed. That's the hatch that they actually utilize to go ahead and get inside the International Space Station. So as we get a little closer to that hatch opening procedure, you might start to see more individuals come into frame for some of that support. The ship has a maximum capacity of a little over 40 people on board, and it takes a variety of different roles, as we've discussed, to support. Also on board is the Chief of the Astronaut Office for NASA, that's Joe Acaba.
Now, while we are standing by for translation of the Dragon spacecraft to the platform there, the recovery platform that we see in the foreground, it is important to note that Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while exiting the spacecraft. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members. As you could imagine, returning to a gravity environment can wreak havoc on our vestibular system, which is responsible for maintaining balance and motion. Of course, safety is our #1 priority with this operation, so we'll see the crew members helped out of the spacecraft one by one, and they will be assisted the few feet to the medical quarters aboard the boat.
And on board Dragon are 3 veteran space flyers. That includes Nick Hague, the commander, as well as Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Alexander Gorbanoff is completing his very first space flight on this mission, and he completed 171 days in space along with Nick Hague.
For those of you that have just recently joined us, well, I would encourage you to hit that rewind button and go back a few minutes. It was a beautiful splashdown of Dragon Freedom with the Crew 9 cohort on board. They had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:57 p.m. Pacific Time. We can see that the spacecraft...
Freedom translation is in progress.
Copy, and seal it.
We can see that spacecraft was successfully recovered from the ocean surface and is now being washed with fresh water, as obviously they splashed down in salt water, so we're trying to rinse off as much of that salt water as possible. And we can see the spacecraft continuing to move closer and closer to that recovery deck.
Freedom, the crew is working on side hatch opening now. Expect hatch open in about 2 minutes.
Okay, copy that. And Kira, just wanted to say that you guys, you and the team did an awesome job, both uphill and downhill. Just really, really impressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. It's been an honor.
This is a pretty exciting moment coming up. We are working to open the side hatch. One thing that may not be obvious from, just looking at the spacecraft here is that this side hatch that we're about to open, the last time it was open was when this spacecraft was at the launch pad. This side hatch is what is used for initial capsule ingress and final capsule egress, but all comings and goings from the spacecraft while it is on board the space station are from the forward hatch, which is located at the top of the spacecraft under that nose cone. So this is a pretty exciting moment because it will be the crew's first breath of fresh air since boarding their ships at the start of their journeys last year.
And the very first person that will have the opportunity to say hello to the crew once that hatch is open is a SpaceX medical recovery personnel representative. Then we'll see procedures take place to remove the footrests of Dragon. That will just help the recovery personnel get a little bit more room to access the crew and help get them out of the spacecraft.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Safety is, once again, top priority here, and removing those footrests from all 4 seats will be helpful as a recovery, as a SpaceX recovery team member will actually go into the capsule, into Dragon Freedom to help the crew members unbuckle and stand up, and essentially we'll also see a fun little slide be put in place to help the crew members exit the spacecraft safely. So yeah, we're going to remove all 4 of those footrests to basically give a little bit more working room inside the spacecraft.
That's right, and we did hear the go for that hatch opening, so we're just a couple minutes away from being able to see that, and then we might be able to get the chance to see a couple of views inside of the Dragon and see the crew following their splashdown.
Now, opening that side hatch isn't quite like opening, the door to your car. We have to depress the seal around the side hatch, as well as, we'll now see them open that side hatch up.
And there you have it. The side hatch is open for the first time since September.
We can see some of the protective equipment there that was brought into frame that will help protect the edge of the side hatch. One, from any potential damage. Oh, we can see the recovery crew member there taking photos of the side hatch seal. This is part of the standard operation for recovery. These photos will get saved into our procedure. We'll then install that protective frame around the side hatch. This helps to ensure that the side hatch itself, the edges of it, incur no damage while crew members are coming out from the spacecraft. If you missed it, there was also a recovery team member that went inside. So there are now 5 people on board the Dragon spacecraft.
And if you are just joining us, it has not yet even been an hour since Crew 9 splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. The crew is now on board the recovery vessel Megan, and the hatch is open. The next major milestone that we'll see is when the crew will actually egress or exit the spacecraft. But before that, they'll continue to, the recovery personnel rather, will continue to install that protective area around the hatch and then remove the footrests. So we're a couple minutes away from seeing the crew egress, but not too long away.
We'll probably see those footrests being handed out here in the near future, as I mentioned before. Of course, we got to get a well-documented photo of the moment. Although we can't see it from here, I'm pretty sure there are 4 smiles on board right now.
And we did hear that report out from the commander, Nick Hague, following splashdown, that there were four smiles as far as he could see.
Yeah, capsule full of grins. Now, generally speaking,
and there we do see Crew 9, some happy waves, smiles all around back on Earth.
Generally speaking, we have the individuals in the 2 center seats of the spacecraft exit first. You might hear us refer to this as the exit process as egress. It's just another term for exiting the spacecraft. Generally speaking, we most of the time have the 2 center seats egress first, as it makes moving around inside the capsule a little bit easier. We can see the tablets that were previously located on the upper leg of the crew members. We can see those being handed out to the recovery team. Those were taken off prior to the entry phase, to spacecraft reentry. Those had to be stored and secured prior to dynamic operations.
It looks like we are starting to see the footrests also be removed. I just saw one there on the screen. There are 4, of course, 1 for each crew member.
Those footrests are made out of carbon fiber and are actually sized appropriately for each crew member, as everybody has different measurements and different leg lengths. Same goes for the armrests and the bucket length of each seat. We size those appropriately for the crew members and to ensure their comfort and safety. I believe we just saw the little ramp that is used to help slide the crew members out from inside the spacecraft.
And once the crew does exit Dragon Freedom, they will be placed on to a stretcher to go to a medical bay for medical checkouts. This is standard procedure for all Dragon spacecraft flights that splashdown crewed, as well as for our Soyuz spacecraft that land in Kazakhstan.
We could see the exterior of Dragon Freedom quite clearly in this shot, and it's such a beautiful sight. I personally prefer the capsule when it has some of that charring from atmospheric reentry. It is the signature sign of a capsule that has returned to Earth.
Continuing to stand by for our first crew member to egress or exit for Dragon Freedom following their splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Dragon undocked from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific just yesterday, so it was about 17 hours of phasing. And while on board the International Space Station, Crew 9 contributed to 900 hours of science, over 150 research experiments and investigations, making great use of the microgravity lab of the International Space Station, which celebrates 25 years of continuous human presence this November.
Looks like we're about to get our first crew member here upon egress of the Dragon spacecraft.
So we are standing by for that egress. Outside of Dragon, you do see one of those stretchers. This is the expected procedure, as the crew will be taken to medical facilities following their exit from Dragon.
We can see folks on board clapping as our first crew member.
And that is NASA astronaut Nick Hague, commander of Crew 9. Now out of Crew Dragon Freedom. Some smiles, thumbs up, and a wave. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, that is one happy camper, that's for sure. As we said before, it is standard procedure for all of our long-duration crew members to receive assistance upon egressing from the spacecraft. We basically help them move off of the recovery deck and into the private medical quarters for their initial consultation with the SpaceX flight surgeon. So we'll see that take place for all 4 of our crew members today.
And we are standing by for the next crew member to exit Freedom. Next up out of the capsule, we expect Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. His first space flight. Spent 171 days in space alongside NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
Looks like we're getting some cheers and clapping on board as Alexander is slid down the little ramp and placed into the mobility aid. Once again, big smile.
Now, the 2 crew members remaining in Dragon are NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. They completed 286 days in space.
One of the remaining footrests being removed from the Dragon spacecraft. As I said before, we generally try to have the crew members that are located in the 2 center seats aboard Dragon, and we like to have them egress first if possible, as it creates a little bit more movable working room inside the spacecraft. There is a recovery crew member inside that is helping all of our Crew 9 crew egress or exit from the spacecraft.
We are standing by for the next crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following the splashdown not even an hour ago at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Really have the recovery operations down pretty quick at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that, you know, just 5 years ago when we were doing the initial demonstration missions of the Dragon for Crew Dragon, that now we're under about 30 minutes for, to retrieve the spacecraft from the water, and just several minutes here while it's been on board, and to get everyone, really to get that side hatch open. For those of you that have just recently joined, the Dragon had an on-time splashdown. Looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
Definitely seems to be a theme among all recovery operations.
Absolutely. And of course, that leaves NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore inside Dragon in seat 4. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery vessel.
Well, now that Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical team, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. The Crew 9 mission began a little differently than usual since Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams were already aboard the space station when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbunoff arrived on the Crew 9 spacecraft in September. Having arrived as the crew flight test crew for Starliner, Wilmore and Williams were fully incorporated into the space station's Expedition 72 team and began research and other work aboard the station along with the other crew members. Williams commanded the orbiting laboratory for much of the expedition. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Nick and Alexander made a short flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station. Veterans of long-duration space station missions, both Williams and Wilmore conducted spacewalks during their 9 months in space. Like all crews on the station, Crew 9 had the ability to leave at any point had there been an emergency. With their full-duration mission coming to an end, the crew began packing up their personal items for their return to Earth about a week ago and worked through tasks and shared lessons learned with Crew 10 teams as they arrived a few days ago.
Their journey home began about 17 hours ago when they closed the forward hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, 1:05 a.m. Eastern. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the approximately 7.5-minute-long deorbit burn, and that occurred at 2:11 p.m. Pacific, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time. And that sent Dragon on its path home. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 main parachutes, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts move in and prepare Dragon Freedom for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Next up, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore, where they'll transfer to aircraft that will take them home. The astronauts will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, where they'll be reunited with family and friends to bring an end to this mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue this new era in human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover we executed after successfully launching the Crew 10 mission to the space station just last week on Friday, March 14th. Thank you, as always, for joining us for tonight's coverage of the splashdown of Crew 9. Remember to follow SpaceX on X and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander on social media as they travel back home. We do also have a post-splashdown media briefing coming up at approximately 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, where leadership will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So, from all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew 9. So long.
broadcast started. Roger, 0G, I feel fine. Godspeed, John Glenn.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Rocket Tranquility, we copy you on the ground.
New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
2-1-0-0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, roger. Go for deploy.
That's to everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger. Nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good afternoon and welcome to our live coverage of the NASA SpaceX Crew 9 mission as it returns to Earth. Dragon Freedom departed the International Space Station at 1:05 a.m. Eastern. That was 10:05 p.m. Pacific time on March 17th for those of us here in California. On board Crew 9 are NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sonny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. And they are now on their way to the targeted splashdown site off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. My name is Kate Tice, Senior Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX. And joining me today from NASA Communications is Sandra Jones.
Thanks, Kate. It's always such a pleasure to be here. Upon departing
program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger. Nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good evening and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space Center for our Crew 9 Post-splashdown news conference. We are joined in studio today by Joel Montalbano, Deputy Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Operations Mission Directorate, Steve Stitch, Manager for NASA's Commercial Crew Program, Bill Spetch, Operations Integration Manager for NASA's International Space Station Program, and joining us virtually, Sarah Walker, SpaceX Director for Dragon Mission Management. We'll be taking some questions from here in the room today and on our phone bridge today. So if you're in the room, be sure to get our attention to ask your question. And if you're on the phone bridge, be sure to press *1 to enter the queue. Before we get started, though, we'll start with some opening remarks from our panel here. And Joel, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And for those of you tying in remotely, thank you for showing an interest in our great space program. It is awesome to have Crew 9 home, just a beautiful landing. I think many of you heard that back in January, the president asked SpaceX what it would take to bring this crew home. And I will tell you that at the time that question was asked, we were already looking at options of what to do with the Crew 10, Crew 9 situation and how we're going to set that up. I'll tell you a little bit, when you plan these dynamic activities, a lot of work goes into them. For example, for the landing that you guys just witnessed today, there's a number of things that we look at, a number of factors, weather being one of them. You saw great weather today. In addition, we look at the readiness of the recovery team to make sure they're ready to go. We look at the handover time on orbit between the incoming crew and the departing crew to make sure there's enough time for activities to be accomplished before the departing crew leaves. We do have the benefit of having NASA astronaut Don Pettit remaining on board. He'll be coming home on Soyuz in April, and so he'll continue the handover with the crew. We also look at the vehicle traffic, the vehicles coming and going. And when you pull all that together, the International Space Station program, the Commercial Crew program, and SpaceX came up with the plan that we just witnessed. The Crew 10 launch last week, the docking over the weekend, the undock early today, and then the landing that we just witnessed. So just an incredible amount of inputs that you get to pull all that together in order to have a successful operation. I want to tell you, we want to thank the Crew 9 team and the ground teams for their dedication to excellence, their resilience, their flexibility during this expedition, everything they did to have a successful expedition, as you have all witnessed. SpaceX has been an incredible partner for us, and it shows the benefits of the commercial, public, private partnership that we have. So they just been a huge, great partner throughout all this. Crew 9, in addition to the spacewalks that many of you witnessed, they performed just about 150 experiments on board the International Space Station with over 900 hours of research. And the work we do on the International Space Station benefits the nation, benefits people on Earth, and are the building blocks for going back to the moon and to Mars. So Nick, Alexander, Butch, and Sonny, welcome home. On behalf of NASA, I want to thank the administration. I want to thank all the work of the NASA teams and all the work of the SpaceX teams. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Commercial Crew Program Manager, Steve Stitch.
Thanks, Joel, and thank you all for being here. Greatly appreciate your interest in the Commercial Crew Program and also human spaceflight. Of course, as you know, it's been just a huge week for Commercial Crew. The missions, I think, sometimes seem easier than they are. If I just step back and think about all the challenges we had to launch Crew 9, moving to a different launch pad, adjusting the seats and the crew training, and then, over the weekend, once we docked Crew 10 safely, looking at the weather patterns, finding this great opportunity that we landed at today, adjusting the timeline. It's never easy. Spaceflight's always dynamic. Sometimes it seems like things move from step to step, but there's usually different paths along the way. So the The weekend was culminated today with the landing of Crew 9. We Dragon splashed down at about 5:57 p.m. off the coast of Tallahassee. That's our first commercial crew program landing at Tallahassee. We've had a couple cargo flights land there. And now it's great to have Crew 9 and the Freedom capsule back home, and its fourth flight is now in the history books. Of course, we're overjoyed. I watched every crew member come out of the vehicle today. Post-landing, it was great to watch Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander come out of Dragon and smile and wave as they came out of the vehicle. We'll get them, they're on the ship now, we'll get them back to meet the NASA aircraft and then back to meet with their families. If you watched the weather today, it was incredible. Clear skies, real low winds, maybe 3 or 4 knots of wind, and really calm seas. You could see the dolphins swimming around the capsule, which was kind of incredible. SpaceX had a nice drone aircraft flying around and taking footage, and that was just incredible. As I said, the ops team just did a phenomenal job over the weekend, pulling in the landing to get the crew home sooner and take advantage of this great weather opportunity. Really appreciate the versatility of SpaceX, the ISS program, commercial crew program, and the flight ops team in planning out the timeline, looking at the crew's workload, determining whether we could pull this off, doing sleep shifting, all those sorts of things that made this an opportunity happen. I also want to thank our partners at the U.S. Coast Guard. They were there on scene, protecting the scene and making sure that it was safe for mariners in the area. The FAA, the Department of Defense, continue to support us. It's great to see the teams really in action. Overall, I would say it was a really clean undocking, reentry, and landing. The Dragon vehicle performed extremely well, didn't really have any issues to work. Little things, a GPS outage that we reset a filter on and things like that. Today, the sequence went perfectly. We jettisoned the trunk, executed the deorbit burn, closed the nose cone, and did the entry. You could hear Nick call down when we finally got the vehicle back through the blackout, 4.6 Gs, and you could tell they were doing well, and then braced for the parachute deploy of the drogues and then the mains, and then having splashdown. So parachutes performed well. The whole system worked just as planned. The crew's doing great. They'll spend a little time on the recovery ship getting checked out, making sure that they're healthy and ready to go, and then eventually they'll make their way back to Houston. Again, I want to congratulate the entire NASA commercial crew program, the SpaceX team. In many ways, if I step back to last year, this has been 9 months in the making, and I couldn't be prouder of our team's versatility, our team's ability to adapt and really build for the future of human spaceflight and looking at different ways to do business, taking advantage of one vehicle to launch a crew and then bring back the crew in a different vehicle. Our partner SpaceX did a tremendous job. Every time we asked them to do something a little different, they stepped up and to the plate and did that, including swapping capsules 6 weeks ago prior to Crew 10, and then also adjusting the Crew 9 mission. We'll celebrate for a while. We're going to take some time in commercial crew to celebrate this one and spend a little time with the crew, and then we'll move on to Crew 11. Crew 11 will be here before we know it. We'll launch that vehicle as early as mid-July, so we'll start preparing for that. And then, we're working hand in hand with Boeing as well on certification of Starliner, getting that vehicle back to flight. Butch and Sonny's return on Dragon, to me, shows how important it is to have 2 different crew transportation systems, the importance of Starliner and the redundancy that we're building in human spaceflight for our low Earth orbit economy. We're super grateful for Boeing as well and their investment. They're keenly interested in the landing today. They have a watch party going on and are watching Butch and Sonny come back. And they've texted me, as the build up to this, they're very keenly interested in Butch and Sonny. And then we're interested in their resilience. That whole Boeing team, like our whole commercial crew program team, is resilient and moving forward to the next steps on Starliner. It's been a busy start to 2025. It's hard to believe we're in the middle or toward late March. Looking for an exciting summer as well, and I look forward to your questions, and I'll hand it over to Bill.
All right, thanks, Steve. Yeah, welcome, and thanks for everybody's interest as we continue on. Return today marks the successful completion of the Crew 9 mission, and really with them handing over operations on board to Crew 10. Just some interesting stats as we go through. Nick and Alexander both spent 171 days in space on this trip, seeing the arrival and departure of 4 different visiting vehicles to the ISS. Butch and Sunny spent 286 days in space, and they got to see 8 different visiting vehicles coming and going from the ISS. We stay really busy as we talk about all these vehicles coming and going from the station. Nick and Butch each conducted 1 spacewalk, and Sunny conducted 2. That actually gave Sunny the record for most time on spacewalks by a woman, and puts her 4th overall in terms of time outside doing spacewalks. The crew contributed to more than 150 unique experiments, like Joel said, including stem cell technology to potentially address blood diseases, autoimmune disorders, and cancers. They tested lighting systems to help maintain circadian rhythms, which will help improve conditions for not only future crews as you go through spaceflight, but also those on the ground for shift workers and those in extreme or remote environments. They did plant growth and quality experiments to support future Moon and Mars missions as we look forward with that. They loaded a really interesting experiment. JAXA had their first wooden satellite. They loaded that into and got that deployed from the ISS. And then as part of their spacewalk, Butch and Sunny collected samples from the station's exterior to study the survivability of microorganisms in the vacuum of space. I'll tell you, the Crew 9 crew did a great job here in the near term supporting this shortened handover period with Crew 10 and enabling that landing opportunity that we saw today. There was a lot of work that they did ahead of Crew 10 arrival to get prepared, and then really working through all of the things that we need to do to hand over the emergency procedures to the crew, to get the cargo transferred that they need to, and to get all the vehicles set up for Crew 10 to be very successful. Crew 10 is already working hard, and they're working on key science investigations on board. They already kicked them off even while they were getting prepped for undocking the other day. So coming up on ISS, we still have a lot going on. We have NG-21 release at the end of March, providing some important trash disposal for the space station. Always, you got to get rid of all the stuff that you bring up, so you got to bring that down somehow, and NG-21 is going to take away a lot of that. And then we'll look forward to Soyuz MS-27 launch Tuesday, April 8th from Baikonur Cosmodrome at about 12:47 a.m. Central. That'll be carrying NASA astronaut Johnny Kim and cosmonauts Sergei Ryzhikov and Alexei Zabritsky. And then before Soyuz MS-26 returns, Alexei Ovchinin will pass on the role of ISS commander to our JAXA astronaut Takuya Nishi. Really a lot of great stuff continuing on station. I really appreciate the entirety of the team, joint with SpaceX, NASA, our operations team, the program teams, the engineering teams, all the work it takes to turn around these missions. It's a ton of stuff, and then we go change it on them at the last minute, and they handle it like the pros that they are. So welcome home to Crew 9, and with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah.
All right, thanks, Bill. Well, it's a good day to be here at SpaceX, and it's a good day down in Florida as we welcome Crew 9 home from their stay at the International Space Station. We're happy to have safely returned Nick, Alex, Sunny, and Butch back to Earth and to their families after their time at the orbiting laboratory. Human spaceflight is dynamic and exciting, and this crew knows that as well as any other. So back in September, Steve was talking about this a bit, Crew 9 became the first human spaceflight mission to launch from Pad 40 using our new Dragon Tower that we completed construction on last year. And it was our first mission in a while to fly a crew of 2 since Bob and Doug's historic flight in 2020. So then just 3 days ago, we launched Crew 10 to take over and continue the work of Crew 9 on ISS. And I forgot to mention this Friday night, but Crew 10 was our 50th Dragon mission since first launching COTS 1 in December of 2010. That's a huge milestone for the team. COTS, if you don't remember, stands for Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, and COTS 1 was the first demonstration mission under that original partnership with NASA to resupply the space station with cargo flights. It was also the mission that inspired me to join the SpaceX team, which I'm so grateful I was given the opportunity to do a few months later. So the rest is history. We've been bringing cargo and more recently crews to the orbiting lab for well over a decade since. And as we talked about a few days ago after Crew 10 launch, NASA and SpaceX adapted as this mission evolved. And I appreciate all the kind words said already during this press conference. As we adapted together, we kept safety at the forefront. And thanks to the teamwork across the two agencies, a change in the Dragon spacecraft for Crew 10 and then a shortened handover helped accelerate the Crew 10 launch and the Crew 9 return. Then over the weekend, we decided as a joint team to undock a day earlier than originally planned to take advantage of some great weather we were seeing off the coast of Tallahassee for splashdown. So I know this required quite a bit of creativity from the NASA team and the onboard crew to compress the handover even further than they already had. And I'm thankful for everyone's hard work and flexibility to safely bring Dragon and the crew home today. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that today's return was also our final Dragon recovery on the East Coast. So after 6 years of successful recovery operations off the coast of Florida, we'll now be moving all Dragon recovery operations back to the West Coast. I just hope the California coast can bring as many dolphins as we saw during today's operation. That was really fun to see. We had a nominal return today. Dragon is healthy and the parachutes performed as expected. The crew is likely on the recovery vessel now, soon to transit to the SpaceX NASA handover location, while the SpaceX vessel transports Dragon back to our refurbishment facility at Cape Canaveral in Florida. It's amazing to think that SpaceX has now safely flown 62 crew members from 14 countries to space, 52 of those to and from the International Space Station. Dragon has supported 46 missions to the station in all, and 29 of those on reflown Dragons. I think that's enough flights that we can be really proud of what the team has built together and what we've accomplished, but always with the humility and awareness that we will continue to learn every single mission. The stakes of getting this right are and always will be high. And as Bill Gerstenmaier often says, we must always stay hungry and vigilant to scour the data before, during, and after every operation we perform. It's always an honor for all of us here at SpaceX to launch human spaceflight missions and safely return astronauts and cosmonauts as we continue to advance human spaceflight. Thanks for having me on the briefing today and look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you all for your opening remarks. We will go ahead and start taking some questions in the room, so please raise your hand, Gina. Go ahead.
I think this is for Steve Stitch. I mean, Crew 9's home, but the research hasn't stopped because what you need to know about what happened with Butch and Sunny on orbit, that's still an ongoing medical research project. Would you kind of expand on that for me? What will you learn about their 9 months on the space station?
Yeah, I think I can comment and then see if Bill has anything to add. But, you know, every single crew member that we fly in orbit, we collect medical research data. We do various blood draws at various times during the flight, especially toward the end. Do bone density measurements in space. We look at their vision and how their vision might change over time, their intracranial pressure. We do all kinds of things. So you're right. Every single astronaut, when they come back, including Nick and Alexander, is participating in all kinds of experiments, and we're learning from all those. And I'll see if Bill has anything to add.
I mean, I think you covered the vast majority of it. We look at everybody when they come home, and every duration adds to that database of knowledge of the effects of spaceflight on the human body. And so we continue to look at that across all of our crew members.
Okay, we'll take another question here in the room. Mark, go ahead.
Mark Strassman, CBS News. Steve, I want to pick up on something you said, which is the keen interest in Butch and Sunny. All 5 major television networks cut in with live special reports following the splashdown, because Butch and Sunny have arguably become America's most famous astronauts over the course of their 9-month saga. So now that they're home, now that the saga is over, what do you is the takeaway?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I haven't probably had a lot of time to reflect. You know, we're certainly looking at Starliner very carefully. We're in the process of looking at that vehicle, looking at the helium system. We've got some candidate seals that we're going to replace. We'll get into some testing here over the summer timeframe with what we call an integrated doghouse at White Sands. So we're looking at that. You know, the thing I think back of this whole timeframe is how really resilient Butch and Sunny were the whole time. I mean, they launched on what was going to be a short test flight with the crew flight test vehicle with Boeing. And then they moved very quickly into station increment operations, and they became seamlessly part of the International Space Station. And they did that because they're experienced astronauts, and we had prepared, right? We had flown gloves for them to do spacewalks, and we had flown a lot of components for them. So I think that shows the adaptability of crew members. And if I think forward to exploration, and maybe some harsh missions to the Martian surface someday, or back to the moon. You know, the adaptability of crew members, changing the timeline for their return. Certainly a huge thank you to their families. You know, when you think about Butch and Sunny, they enjoyed their time on station. They got to do spacewalks, and they got to do lots of cool science and things like that. Their families are the ones that really, you know, kudos to them for being resilient in a planned short duration flight now turning into a long duration. And I think back of when they went into quarantine. They went into quarantine in the April timeframe for the early May launch that we had for the crewed flight test. So the families, a huge thank you to them. I'm sure the reunion is going to be wonderful with the families. And we'll keep learning as we go and keep being adaptable in the future.
Let me just add, if it's okay, it shows the flexibility of our commercial providers. The fact that they flew up on the Boeing vehicle and home on SpaceX, this is a lesson learned for NASA too, such that when we do have Boeing and SpaceX both flying on a regular basis, we need to be able to do the opposite too. If we come up on a SpaceX vehicle and have a problem to be bringing people home on a Boeing vehicle, it shows you, you know, this year I think many of you know we celebrate 25 years of crewed on the International Space Station, and just shows the flexibility we have with the space station and our commercial partners.
We'll take our next question here in the room. Go ahead.
Ed Lavendero with CNN. Two questions. Do you have specifics on the timeline of when the astronauts will be landing back here in Houston and reuniting with their family over the next, I'm presuming, the next few hours? And then secondly, the more delicate question is, of all the talk that we've seen over the last months that these astronauts had been, quote, stranded in space, how did that kind of talk affect you guys over the last few months in formulating a plan to get them back home?
Yeah, I don't have the specifics of the timeline. I know they're going to fly back here tonight. They'll probably spend some time rehabilitating a little bit, and the doc's watching them, and then they'll rejoin their families in the next, you know, day or so. You know, relative to the mission planning, I think what we did was we tried to look for opportunities to bring the crew back when it was safe to do so. And, you know, we always had a lifeboat, a way for them to come home all the way back to Starliner. If you remember, during the Starliner crewed flight test mission, we said if there were an emergency during part of that mission, we considered the thrusters, the service module thrusters, good enough to bring the crew back then. We then transitioned to the Crew 8 vehicle for a temporary time frame until Crew 9 arrived. So we always had a way to get the crew home safely should we need to. And then it really became, when is the right time? When is the right time to bring them back? And then when we had to swap over Dragon capsules from the new vehicle, which wasn't quite ready, we moved to Capsule 210. We figured this March timeframe was the timeframe to execute this direct handover that we just did. So for me, it's been the normal kind of planning I do all the time, looking at all the options, working with SpaceX, working with the space station program, and finding the right time to bring the crew back.
Okay, we'll take another question here in the room.
Hi guys, my name is Amanda Henderson. I'm with KHOU 11, the CBS affiliate here in Houston. 10 days turning into 9 months, but turning also into hundreds of hours of invaluable research that they got up there at the ISS, and also moonwalk hours. Can you talk a little bit about how, when you realized that they were going to be up there for longer than the intended time frame, they were able to transition into getting that invaluable research started?
Yeah, I can start with that one, and I can let these guys add in. So even before they launched, because we knew they were flying on a test mission, we provided all the training for the stay on ISS that they would need to be a long-duration crew member. We flew the equipment. Every crew has unique equipment that they need to do a spacewalk, and we made sure we had that up there. So I think it really comes to the preparation that we did even before they flew that allows them to be so successful when they get up there. And that's really what we do with all of the crews that fly to the ISS. There's the rigorous training program that they go through. They're prepared for things. They have a lot of skills-based training that goes on so that they know how to do the basics of everything. And then we have an outstanding team on the ground working with them. They get to work directly with the scientists in a lot of cases on experiments that help walk them through what they're doing, video downlinks. We have a lot of different ways to kind of help them through, and it really just enables everything that they then do on board in an effective manner. But it all starts with that preparation that we did ahead of time, knowing that we have a test mission coming.
I do think the difference, like the shuttle missions had a finite duration. The way the space shuttle worked, it had fuel cells, and they used liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen to power those fuel cells. And so at some point, that vehicle had to return. But the beauty of the space station is wonderful laboratory, wonderful place for the astronauts to live and work, and you can almost stop the clock if you have a problem. And I think that's something that we learned on this flight that's a little bit different is, so when Starliner we had planned for maybe a short 10 to 2 week mission for a test flight, when we needed more time, we took that time to understand the vehicle. And then when we determined that the better option would be to bring Butch and Sonny back on Dragon, we pivoted over to that plan. So I think station gives us that flexibility that we never had before. And we also have flexibility now, as Joel said, with 2 different vehicles. So someday there may be a case where we're using Starliner to handle a Dragon contingency problem of some sort. So we have a luxury that maybe we didn't have in the past, and so we're adapting and learning from that.
All right, we'll head over to our phone bridge to Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, good evening. Probably for you, Steve. I understand the crew is being flown to Houston tonight and that they'll be staying at JSC and crew quarters. When will they be able to go home if they're feeling good? How much time off do they get before they have to go back to work? Are you giving them some extra bonus vacation? And when do you have to decide whether Starliner is going to be carrying Crew 12 up? What's the deadline for deciding on that mission, whether it'll be Starliner or Dragon? Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there. I hope I get all of them. Let's see. The first question was, when do they go back to their families? It's usually within a day or two, once they're cleared medically, that we make sure, as they readapt to gravity here on Earth, it's usually a day or two. They'll go back to their families. And then, they'll get some time off, and then we've done a lot of, fortunately with Butch and Sonny, we've done a lot of debriefs already with them. And so we've gotten feedback on Starliner and feedback on many things for the crewed flight test already from them while they were on orbit. They'll have a standard set of debriefs with the Crew 9 crew because they really have been part of Crew 9 ever since Crew 9 docked. So they'll go through a series of debriefs, and then, but they will get some well-deserved time off, well-deserved time with their families. It's been a long time for them, and look forward to hearing their stories about meeting with their family. I think the last question, Marcia, was when do we have to decide Crew 12 versus the next step with Starliner? And we probably have a little bit more time as we get into the summer and understand the testing we're going to go do to make that decision, whether it be Crew 12 as the next flight or Starliner. We're also looking at some options for Starliner. Should we need to, of flying it uncrewed. The vehicle has the capability to fly uncrewed if we need to. And so we'll kind of weigh all those things as we get the testing and analysis behind us. Boeing's done a good job of developing a new thermal model, which we're using to try to understand the changes we're going to make in those dog houses. We'll add some tape and thermal barriers in different places. So we have a little time to make that decision.
Okay, our next question is from Chris Davenport with The Washington Post.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for taking my question, and congrats on a successful end to the mission for Steve Stitch. You had mentioned your discussions with Boeing, and I'm just wondering, has Boeing given you a 100% commitment that they are sticking with the program, just given the enormous costs they've had to eat? And is NASA doing anything to incentivize them to stay? You just mentioned an uncrewed flight, for example. Thanks.
Yeah, Boeing, all the way up to their new CEO, Kelly, has been committed to Starliner. I can see that in the way they're approaching their solution to the problems. They're taking the time to understand the leaks we had in the helium system and testing some new seals that we may field in those flanges. The same thing with the test plans that are multifaceted for the thrusters, some testing of the Teflon material, testing, integrated testing at White Sands. So I see them being very committed. They want to provide a transportation system with crewed capability to fulfill their missions. And then they're even, I think, stepping beyond that and thinking about low Earth orbit and COMLEO destinations with their vehicles. So I see a commitment from Boeing to continue the program. They realize that that they have an important vehicle, and we were very close to having a capability that we would like to field. I think we have some changes we need to make to the way we heat those thrusters, the way we fire those thrusters, and then we can test that on the next flight. So.
Our next question is from Ken Chang with the New York Times.
Hi, thank you. This is for Joel, Steve, and Sarah. The White House put out a statement that said the landing today representing President Trump keeping his promise to rescue the astronauts stranded in space. And from what you just said during this news conference, I think it's been in the works for months and a lot of work for everyone. I was just wondering, could you explicitly answer the question, if Kamala Harris were president, or if Joe Biden had run for re-election and won, would anything have changed with this mission? Thank you.
NASA as an agency, we work for the president, and who's ever there, we work for them. We had an input from that office. We took a look at it, and our job is to take all the inputs we get and operate as successful and safely as we can. And that's what we would do for this administration, and that's what we would do for any administration.
Our next question is from Sana with Bloomberg News.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. I had another question regarding Boeing. I know you just mentioned that you're looking at options for an uncrewed mission. So I guess we're wondering who would pay for the uncrewed mission, and would Boeing be required to redo the crewed test flight as well? Thanks.
Yeah, what we're looking at right now is we really want what I would call is a crewed capable vehicle. So even if we were to fly the vehicle without a crew in the return back to the next steps on with Starliner, we want that to be crew capable. So we want it to have all the systems in place that that we could fly a crew with. And in fact, as I think about it, it might be there for a contingency situation as we prepare for whatever events could happen. One of the things that I've learned in my time at NASA is always be prepared for the unexpected, always have options. And so that's what we're thinking about. So we'll take those steps forward. We'll look at the test data. We'll make a decision whether to fly it crewed or uncrewed. And then, we are trying to do it under what we call this post-certification phase of the contract. And Boeing has delivered a lot of the certification data already. They have a little bit more to go relative to the prop system. I think we talked about they're flying a new spacesuit eventually, and a few other things like that. So we're looking at doing it under that phase of the contract, and NASA meeting its commitments on those flights.
Our next question is from Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and congrats on the splashdown of Crew 9. Maybe just following up on Ken's question to Joel and Stitch and Sarah. Obviously, as you've discussed tonight and over the last several months, the plan has been established for some time on how to bring Butch and Sunny back to Earth. But barring them returning on the seats that were added on the Crew 8 Dragon spacecraft, had the decision been made to try to bring them back any earlier, was there a Dragon spacecraft that would have been available to operate that mission prior to the Dragon that we just saw support the launch of Crew 10? Thanks.
Yeah, the earliest Dragon that we had to go fly the mission really was this capsule 210. And so when we were planning originally on Crew 10 to have the newer spacecraft, we thought it would be ready. And initially, we were going to launch in mid-February. We moved it to March 25th. And then I think Sarah talked briefly before about some of the challenges we had, or maybe it was Mr. Gerstenmaier, with a battery system that was a bad component we had to pull off. We had to pull the heat shield off and vector out of some work on the vehicle. We had some challenges with some valves in the prop system. And this, to me, is just evidence of how complicated. I don't think we always do a super good job of explaining how complicated the spacecraft itself is made up of millions of components that have to work in an integrated fashion, and you go through testing and qualification to get there. And so those components didn't work, and when we looked at that, we just pivoted over to the vehicle that was going to be ready the soonest, which was Capsule 210, and that led us to the March 12th date and then eventually the March 15th launch.
Our next.
Yeah, and maybe I would just add that with 5 Crew Dragon spacecraft in the fleet, certainly many paths are possible, right? With the allocations as we had them with our current slate of missions in the next 12 to 18 months, exactly as Steve said, it was the new spacecraft that was anticipated to be ready first, with the one we ended up flying shortly on the heels, and then when we ran into a processing issue on that new vehicle, the other one could be ready sooner, and so those were the 2 that were coming available. But certainly we can pivot and adapt. Flexibility is the name of the game, right? And so if we change what lanes or what stage of the flow any given spacecraft is in, we can open up other options available. But we had these vehicles allotted to or allocated to specific missions, and these were the 2 spacecraft that met the need that we had here in the spring to fly these missions in the timeframes that they were requested.
All right, our next question is from Joey Roulette.
Hey, thanks. Just 2 questions. One quick one for Steve. I just want to be clear. So it sounds like the testing results that you guys are going to have with Starliner this summer and maybe later on is going to determine whether its next mission is uncrewed or crewed. And whatever that next crewed mission is that going to be like a routine certification crewed mission, or might there be another CFT? And then the second question is for Bill Specht. I was just wondering if there's any studies that Butch and Sunny are involved in that investigates the like behavioral or psychological kind of response to not just long duration spaceflight, but unexpected changes to the to a mission in the middle of it. Thanks.
Yeah, when we look back at the crewed flight test, we got a lot of good data out of that flight relative to having a crew on board. So really the thing that we need to solidify and go test is the prop system and the service module. We need to make sure we can eliminate the helium leaks, eliminate the service module thruster issues that we had on docking, and then the rest of the vehicle performed really well. So when we look forward, what we'd like to do is that one flight and then get into a crew rotation flight. So the next flight up would really test all the changes we're making to the vehicle, and then the next flight beyond that, we really need to get Boeing into a crewed rotation. So that's kind of the strategy.
Yeah, and then to your second question, all of our crew members go through evaluations. They fill out surveys. They do medical evals. So all of these things happen on every crew member. So we do get some unique data from Butch and Sunny based on their stay, but it's something that we do with every crew member that flies. There's always changes that happen on board. There's always adjustments that we have to make that all of the crew members adapt to. As you've watched with our flight schedule over the years, it's very rare that we actually get a flight to fly exactly where we planned it 2 years out when they were thinking it was going to be. So it's okay that we have these changes and they adapt really well. But everybody gets kind of looked at in terms of those effects and understanding just the effects of spaceflight on them. So.
Okay, our next question is from Maria with KBIR Knoxville.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for your time. If someone can walk me through the physical and mental adjustments that the astronauts are going to be experiencing.
I can try and see if Bill and Joel have anything to add. When they get back, the body is an amazingly adaptable. The one thing that the body will struggle a bit with is the inner ear and the vestibular response in microgravity. When you transition from 1G here that we're sitting in this room to then in space, the inner ear can get a little disturbed because gravity's not pulling the fluid down and the little hairs inside the inner ear. And so the crew can take a little while to get to adapt to microgravity. That same thing happens in reverse when you land back on Earth. The human body was adaptable and was used to being in microgravity. Now, the vestibular response is such that you feel disoriented, you may feel a little dizzy, you may have trouble getting up. And then, of course, physically, their body, when they were operating in space and doing operations inside the various modules, their muscles weren't working as hard, their heart wasn't working as hard, and so there's a muscular and cardiovascular kind of reconditioning that has to happen. And so that's what's happening now. And then, there's a little bit of response coming back to 1G. In space, I could let this pin, release this pin, and it's going to stay right where it is. And in 1G, if I release the pin, it falls. And so there's a little bit of that the crew has to get back and learn the skills back here on Earth again. So.
Okay, our next question is from Jackie with the Times of London.
Hello, and thank you. I'm sorry if this is a really frustrating question because I know there's so much good work done on this mission, but there has been a fictitious narrative woven around it by prominent people who are hard to ignore. Why has NASA not pushed back more emphatically against that and against the use of astronauts by one of its commercial contractors as political pawns? And what's to be lost by simply correcting that narrative for the sake of the public who have paid for the mission? Thank you.
I would say, our job at NASA is to successfully and safely fly these missions. We fly it with the laws of physics, and we fly it with our commercial partners. And so oftentimes there may be things out in the press that may not be exactly what's happening. And our job is to fly these missions, and regardless of what you read in the press, our job is to fly successful missions, safe missions, and do the science we do on board the International Space Station. I mentioned this year 25 years of continuous crew presence on board later this year, the International Space Station. And we do about 150 experiments every expedition we fly. So think about it, every 6 months. I think we're over 3,000 experiments since we started the International Space Station, and that's what we focus on.
Okay, our next question is from Jeff Faust with Space News.
Hey, good evening. Question for Bill or Steve. Since the Crew 9, Crew 10 handover lasted only a couple of days, was there anything you would normally do on a handover you weren't able to do in this case? And in the future, might you consider shorter handovers between future commercial crew missions? Thanks.
Yeah, across the board, the main thing that we have to get done is, like anytime you get to a new place, is the emergency briefings. Where do I go in case of an emergency? What are my duties in terms of an emergency? And that happens very early on. And then the follow-ons are more of the general, hey, where did you guys put this thing? Or where did you put that? Where did you leave this wrench when you get up there? Because you can imagine the size of the space stations is so large, and there's a lot of stuff up there. So a lot of the handover that we do with the crews is more set up to be an efficiency gain. And that really helps them be more effective when they go and get to the tasks done that we need to. So when we reduce that time, we reduce that efficiency in the near term to accomplish the tasks on board. We evaluate that each time and understand what our handover is. In general, we don't look to reduce that because we want to be as efficient as possible. We want to get everything done in the most efficient manner, get the most things done on space station that we can. But in this case, it was actually to our advantage to go work that shorter handover and then get them home as quicker, hitting this weather day that we had here today, and not leave it up to how the weather was going to behave days and days from now. So the critical stuff always gets done, that emergency handover, that how do we go handle contingencies on board. They're trained on the ground for all of these things, and we have a lot of support for the teams on the ground to help them as they go, so we can shorten it if we want to, but it's not quite the same as getting up there and finding out from the person that's been up there for 6 months, hey, I found that this was the best spot to put this, or I left this here, and so when you need it, go look over there. to go do this, or this is the best way to go pull out this drawer, or whatever you have to do for your experiments on board. So nothing beats that face-to-face handover and the time they get up there, but we have the options to shorten it when it makes the most sense.
Okay, our next question is from Sawyer with NASAspaceflight.com.
Thank you so much. This question is, I believe, for Sarah. With this being the final splashdown on the east coast of the United States, what is the plan for Megan? Is that going to be repurposed to the west coast? Is that going to stay on the east coast? And then what becomes the contingency if, for example, the weather isn't good at the planned Pacific landing sites, whereas here you had the Gulf and the Atlantic?
Hey, we don't know the answer yet to what will happen, what will become of Megan. We've got Shannon here on the West Coast. I'm sitting here in California right now, and there's unique benefits and unique challenges of weather patterns on the West Coast versus the East Coast. Just one example, we have far more stable weather in terms of wind and wind speed, wave height than we did in Florida. So where we needed numerous sites on both coasts of Florida to provide geographic diversity to avoid weather patterns that may be happening in one area and not another, not so much the case on the West Coast. However, our cloud cover is different here than in Florida. And so things like the airborne assets that support our mission might have different challenges out here than over there. So we've done a lot of trying to learn from meteorologists and historical weather patterns, and then figure out the right number of sites and the right number of support assets to ensure that we maintain a high return availability, which means a high percentage of days that would be a viable return option with a safe splashdown, regardless of what coast we're splashing down on.
All right, our next question is from Isam with AFP. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute. A couple of quick questions. Steve, you mentioned that they'd be released to their families in a day or two, but they're still going to be going through with rehabilitation for quite a while, right? If you could discuss that. And the other second question is just a bit broader to follow on from some of my colleagues. As Steve confirmed that, Crew 10 was the designated mission that this could happen, could you help us sort of square that circle that, with praising the administration for accelerating the timeline? How concretely, just to follow up on my colleagues' questions, how concretely can the administration be credited with accelerating the recovery when, the plan hasn't fundamentally changed here? It's just something that we're having a little bit of trouble understanding. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll talk the rehabilitation and I'll let Joel talk about the other questions. Rehabilitation will continue. There's a sequence of exercises that they do to try to regain their physical strength over a number of weeks. It's a pretty standard protocol that they go through post-landing to recover. It's well documented, well practiced, and the docs and the trainers that do this work will kind of follow each crew member, whether it be Butch and Sonny or the others. We talk about Butch and Sonny because they had a 9-month stay, but the others had 171-day stay or so, which is pretty typical of what we've had. And I'll let Joel handle the other questions.
And so you were asking the input from the administration. So I think Ken Bowersox said it well the other day. It excited the system, right? It gave us some energy in the system. But the other input was to do this successfully and safely. And that's why I talked about all the different inputs that you get. We got the input from the White House, but you also have to look at the vehicle readiness. We talked about looking at weather. We talked about recovery team, handover, the vehicle traffic going to and from the International Space Station. So when you put all that together, we came up with I thought, a pretty good plan that the teams executed over the last 4 or 5 days.
All right, we'll take the next question here in the room.
Darlene Ferris with Fox 26 Houston. I was just wondering if any of the experiments or tasks, was there anything that was able to be done due to the unexpected extra manpower with them on board that wouldn't have like a benefit to having the extra people?
So we once Crew 9 arrived and Crew 8 departed, we were at our normal crew level, so we managed within the normal kind of cadence that we did there. But before that, we absolutely took advantage of Butch and Sunny being there and having the extra hands. We had some maintenance activities that had to be done over the summer that would have potentially taken away from some of the science that we were doing that we didn't have to take away from that time because of the fact that we had the extra hands there. So it was great having them there over the summer as extra hands to help out with a number of activities going on.
Okay, we'll take our next question here in the room.
This may be premature, but initial reports from the recovery ship just about their condition and how they're doing. Has anybody heard?
I haven't heard anything specifically from the recovery team, but just in looking at the way as they came out of Dragon, they all looked very healthy. You could tell they all looked like they were feeling about normal for the landing and recovery phase where their body's trying to readapt. So, yeah, I haven't heard any reports of anything other than that they're doing well. So
I saw a lot of smiling and waving.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay, our next question is from Ellen with thedailymail.com.
Hi, thank you guys so much for taking our questions tonight. This question is for Joel. Barry Wilmore's daughter spoke out on social media and blamed politics and negligence for her dad's delayed return. We know that President Trump and Elon Musk both said the previous administration didn't want to bring the Starliner crew back for political reasons. Can you comment on these claims? Yeah,
so I wasn't involved in any conversations with the previous administration. It was clear we have a request from the current administration, and the results you saw is what we saw today with the landing of Crew 9.
Okay, we'll take our next question here in the room.
Have you guys gotten a chance to talk with the families of Butch and Sunny? And I mean, I'm sure just being able to see them wave and smile today is a huge relief for them, but they've been in quarantine and up in space for almost a year. How are they feeling with everything?
Yeah, I haven't talked personally to the families, but I know the astronauts have a great support system. In other words, they're able to effectively FaceTime with their family and keep in touch with their family. I'm sure Butch is looking forward, and Sunny both coming. Easter's coming up, and there's graduations coming up, and there's lots of family activities coming up that the timing's probably pretty good for. So I haven't had a chance to talk to the family, so.
My guess they had bigger smiles than the crew members.
Yes, yes.
Okay, our next question is from Mike with space.com.
Thank you, guys. This is probably for Sarah. I was just wondering, were there any different approaches that you guys took with this Dragon to kind of meet this faster deadline, or this, and if there were any kind of changes to the processing, are those things you can take into future missions?
Hey, no changes to the processing. And actually, if you're able to go back and listen to Friday night's briefing, I think Steve also shared a little more detail about that. But similar process, it's just a matter of doing a little bit of Tetris within our facilities of what vehicles are going into what tests or what operations in the pre-launch processing flow first. So we certainly did that. There's a few items of hardware within the vehicle that are unique to the specific crew flying. For example, we have small, medium, and large seat buckets installed in each of the 4 locations, and then custom foam for each individual to further customize their experience. And so there was a little bit of just doing the tally on the unique hardware and making sure it was all okay to be used for this mission, but nothing unique to the actual processing flow itself.
Okay, our next question is from Carolyn with Fortune Magazine.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. I'm wondering, can you just share a little more how Sunny and Butch handled kind of the switch mentally to the 9-month mission, besides being very resilient, and what advice you give the rest of us lonely humans when we encounter challenging circumstances? And then maybe just talk a little more about the physical repercussions with respect to radiation, effects on the heart and cornea, that kind of thing, and how how we go about planning to protect against that when we think about missions like to Mars and extended stays? Thanks.
I can start, and then the other guys could ask. You know, before an astronaut flies, we talk to the crew. The crew members are talked to about extending. Hey, you may be assigned for a 6-month mission or an 8-day mission in this case, and you may be extended. Frank Rubio was an example, right? Mark Vande Hei was an example. So this isn't the first time that people are flown. Clearly their mission was much shorter than those other missions, but the crew members are talked about, hey, what would you do if you had to be up there for a year? So they mentally prepare before they launch, and they talk to the other crew members that have flown for these long duration missions. And so the teams are preparing. We do different things on the ground. If you're there a little longer than normal, maybe you'll have some extra family conference times, or maybe a half day off after a certain amount of time on orbit. And so we had experience from past crew members, and we made changes in the operations and how we do that. And so let's see, Bill, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the other question was, really on kind of the effects of space on people in general, and when you change the duration on them. We look at every crew member when they're going up and making sure that we feel confident, even if their mission had to be extended, that they're up for it and that they've got, I think, the time allowable, I think, for them to stay in space and to go through that. We monitor everything on board. We keep an eye on things like radiation. We keep an eye on things like solar activity that can affect that. We keep an eye on the rest of the environmental factors on board, whether it be the carbon dioxide levels, the CO2 levels, the contaminants that we have on board. We have scrubbers and filters and things that take that out. So we do all the things that we would normally do to manage that for crew and minimize their exposure to anything that could be considered harmful. And then we limit the times to the best of our ability that we can up there.
Our next question is from Marcia Smith with spacepolicyonline.com.
Thanks so much. Steve, you mentioned that Crew 11 might launch as early as July, which seems like a pretty short interval for Crew 10 to be up there. Could you talk about what's driving you to launch as early as July? And will either of the astronauts who are bumped from Crew 9 be on Crew 11, Stephanie Wilson or Zena Cardman? And which capsule will they be flying?
Let's see the timing for that mission right now. Originally we were going to fly that mission. We had been, if you look at historically, our rotations have been in February and August. There is a particular SpaceX cargo flight, CRS 33, that has the ability to do some reboost for the space station, and that needs to fly in that late August, early September timeframe. And so we moved our handover up. That boost trunk is what we call it, will be there for a large part of the fall timeframe. So to get all the propellant used on that mission. So that's why we looked at moving it up. Right now, we think we'll fly probably the Capsule 206, which is our fleet leader. It'll be on its 6th flight. We'll continue to work that with SpaceX. You have to remember with space station, one of the critical consumables is docking ports. We have 2 of those docking ports. And so once we fly that the CRS 33 mission with the boost trunk, one of those docking ports will be tied up for an extended duration. And we like to do this direct handover. We like to ensure the new vehicle is there, the new crew's there, before we undock the astronauts that have been there for the increment in progress. And so when you put all that together, it drove us to look at right now, mid to late July. Of course, things can change over time, but that's kind of what we're looking at. We'll kind of pivot over to that once we complete the debriefs for Crew 10. So,
our next question is from Will Robinson Smith with Spaceflight Now.
Hi. Taking a question from us. Question to Steve Fitch. Going back to the comment you made earlier in this briefing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that there was another look that needed to be taken at the flight suit for those flying both these flyers. Can you add a little more detail to that may need to be changed and the reason for that? Thanks.
Did you get that?
I couldn't.
I'm sorry, you're coming in a little bit, it's breaking up a little bit. Can you please try to repeat your question? Operator, if you could please unmute the participant. Will, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect.
I'm sorry, we keep losing you. If you could just follow up with us after this news conference, we'll be happy to get a response over to you from the panel up here. But for now, that'll do it for our press conference this evening. Once again, Crew 9 is safely back on Earth. And as always, you can follow NASA and all of our missions on nasa.gov. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.